Alright, so
Alright, Spencer's been studying. What have you been studying?
glycolysis, cell respiration.
Mommy's here. Alright, what's the story again on this?
Alright, so you have glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, and then in glycolysis, and then 2 ATP come in, and you end up with the 2 ATP drop off 2 phosphates, and it leaves as 2 ADP. And the 2 phosphates bond with the glucose, the 6-carbon molecule, to have a 6-carbon backbone with 2 phosphates. And then that's unstable, so it breaks up into a phosphate with 3-carbon backbone, and there's 2 of those. And then the 2 phosphates come in and create a 3-carbon backbone with 2 phosphates, and then there's 2 of those molecules. And then 4 ADP come in, and each ADP takes 1 of those phosphates. And so it leaves as 4 ATP, which is what we're trying to create with the cell respiration. And then you have 3-carbon backbone, and then 2 of the 3-carbon backbones, and then 2 NAD plus comes in, and it takes 2 hydrogen ions, and so it leaves a 2 NADH, and you end up with 2 3-carbon molecules, which is purvuric acid. And then you have those 2 3-carbon molecules, the purvuric acid, and then you go into the Krebs cycle, and the NAD plus comes in and takes a hydrogen ion and becomes NADH, and then coenzyme A comes in, and so you have and CO2 leaves. So you have a 2-carbon backbone or acetyl coenzyme A, and then the coenzyme A goes back to the start of the pre-Krebs cycle, and so you end up with the 2 carbons, the 2-carbon molecule. And that bonds with the 4-carbon molecule coming from the end of the Krebs cycle and becomes the 6-carbon molecule. And then the NAD plus comes in, leaves with the hydrogen ion, becomes NADH, and CO2 leaves, so you end up with a 5-carbon molecule. And the same thing happens again with the NADH and the CO2, and you end up with a 4-carbon molecule. Then ADP comes in, rearranges the 4-carbon molecule, and takes 2 phosphates from the matrix, and becomes 2 ADP come in, rearranges it, takes 2 phosphates from the matrix, and becomes 2 ATP. And then FAD plus comes in, takes 2 hydrogen ions, and becomes FADH2. And then NAD plus comes in, takes hydrogen ion, becomes NADH, and you still have those 4-carbon molecules, and that goes back to the beginning of the Krebs cycle and bonds with the 2 carbons and restarts that cycle. And then you have third one. Okay, now I understand this, by the way. Okay, so the electron transport chain. So now you take the NADH, and you have the NADHs, you have the FADH2, and you have the what do you call it? You have the NADH, the ATP, and the FADHs, and you go into the electron transport chain, and each one does this individually, but the NADH is split up into NAD plus, a hydrogen ion, and 2 electrons. And the 2 electrons then go through each of the proteins in the cristae, which is the bump in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. But it goes into the cristae, and each protein it passes through, it releases energy and goes down in energy level until it gets to the end, and I'll come back to that. And so when it gets to the end, it has those 2 electrons come back with the hydrogen ion and half of the 2 oxygen atoms and becomes H2O. That happens at the end, and it releases H2O. But by building those energy in those proteins, it allows the proteins to use active transport, because it needs energy to do active transport, to move from the low concentration of hydrogen ions inside the matrix into the outer compartment. So the hydrogen ions go from inside the matrix through the proteins that are energized, allowing it to do active transport, into the highly concentrated outer membrane with highly concentrated hydrogen ions. Then with the ATP synthase, the high concentration of hydrogen ions go through facilitated diffusion, go through the ATP synthase protein, and at the base of the ATP synthase protein, the kind of module spins, and when it spins, it creates pressure, because it's like a hydrogen pump, it creates that energy with the energy flow. So it spins and it creates pressure, and it takes the ADP and a phosphate group and squeezes them together to create ATP. And in the end, it creates, with all of them, it creates 34 ATP to go along with the 4 ATP, meaning the first 2 cycles for a total of 38 ATP, and you have energy. I learned it. Very proud of myself.
You know it.
Yeah. So,
Nice job.
not too bad.
Nice.
Okay, that's enough.
Nice job, Spence.
Thank you.